In a dimly lit war room buried beneath the Pentagon, a young intelligence officer stares at a line of freshly decoded text streaming from a clattering teletype machine. The message, intercepted from a German U-boat command channel, contains two words that make his hands freeze. Projekt Neptun, the officer calls for his superior. Within minutes, the room is alive with murmurs, cigarette smoke, and disbelief. The message describes something unprecedented, eine Waffe, den Atlantikkrieg zu beenden, a weapon to end the Atlantic War. No one knows what it means, but the implication is clear. The Nazis are building something the Allies haven't seen before. As analysts gather around the decoding table, they trace the signal's origin to a naval base near Kiel, Germany. The chatter grows darker with each translation: reactor core, prolonged submersion, uranium delivery. A silence falls over the room. One of the senior officers, pale with realization, mutters under his breath, "This isn't just another U-boat. This is something else." Washington goes on high alert. The word nuclear begins circulating in secret cables between the War Department and naval intelligence. Could Germany, bombed, blockaded, and desperate, truly be on the verge of creating a submarine that never surfaces? One capable of striking American cities without warning? Outside, the winter wind howls through the empty streets of D.C., but inside that room, it feels colder still. The message is brief, incomplete, and terrifying. If it's true, America isn't just fighting a war across the ocean anymore. The war may already be coming to its shores, and as the transmission ends, the officer realizes something even more chilling. The message wasn't meant to be intercepted. It was bait. Fade to black. The year is 1944, and Germany is crumbling. Allied bombers roar over the Reich day and night, turning factories into ashes and cities into graves. The once unstoppable Wehrmacht is retreating on every front. But inside the fortified bunkers of Berlin, Hitler refuses to accept defeat. His voice, trembling with fury, echoes through concrete corridors as he demands a miracle, a weapon the world has never seen. That order lands squarely on the desk of Admiral Dönitz, commander of the Kriegsmarine. Dönitz knows the Atlantic is lost. Allied sonar and radar have turned Germany's once feared wolf packs into hunted prey. Yet the Führer's command is absolute. If the Reich is to survive, Dönitz must do the impossible: design a submarine that cannot be caught. Within weeks, whispers begin circulating through the U-boat bases of a vessel that could travel across the ocean without surfacing, without refueling, without being detected. Codename Projekt Neptun. In the industrial city of Kiel, shrouded in fog and fear, a new kind of war begins. Beneath the cover of bomb-damaged warehouses, German engineers work alongside scientists taken from universities, research centers, and even prisons. Among them are nuclear physicists who once studied under Heisenberg, now forced into service under the watchful eyes of the SS. Their task: create a compact reactor powerful enough to drive a submarine across the Atlantic. The nights are long and filled with dread. Sparks fly from welding torches as half-finished hulls loom like steel monsters over the docks. Workers disappear without warning, silenced for asking too many questions. Every component is stamped with the black insignia of the SS. Even Dönitz himself is kept partially in the dark. The project now belongs to the inner circle, the men closest to Hitler's mad dream. Rumors spread through the shipyards. A new metal alloy is being shipped from Norway, heavily guarded convoys arriving only at night. Engineers whisper that it isn't metal at all, but uranium oxide, the same material Allied scientists fear could unleash the power of the atom. Thousands of miles away, in the quiet halls of Bletchley Park, British cryptographers begin noticing strange messages within German naval codes, references to extended endurance trials and core stability. The words don't make sense to them yet, but the frequency of the transmissions alarms Allied command. Meanwhile, in Washington, reports of missing cargo ships in the Baltic are filed away, half read. overshadowed by Europe's ongoing chaos. Inside a hidden bunker beneath Kiel, SS engineers assemble a cylindrical device unlike anything seen before. It hums faintly when powered, a prototype reactor designed to generate continuous propulsion without air. If it works, a single U-boat could cross the Atlantic submerged for months, invisible to radar and sonar alike. But the cost is high. Several tests end in disaster. One explosion at the facility kills 12 scientists instantly, their bodies sealed in concrete to keep the secret contained. The SS labels it sabotage, executing 3 technicians on suspicion of treason. The survivors are told that failure is no longer an option. Success means life, failure means execution. As the Allies close in on Germany from east and west, Dönitz accelerates the project. He knows the war is slipping away, but if he can launch even one operational nuclear-powered U-boat, it could change everything. An undetectable vessel carrying a nuclear device could strike New York, Washington, or London without warning. Every day, the construction site grows more secretive. Civilian workers are replaced by soldiers. Engineers are forbidden to speak of their assignments, even to their families. Trains arrive under cover of darkness, their cargo sealed and unmarked. When questioned, officers simply say, "It's for Neptun," but the Allied blockade tightens. Bombs fall closer to Kiel with each passing week. Dönitz's sub-commanders report shortages of steel, fuel, and men. Still, the work continues, obsessive, feverish, desperate, and then, one night, as the sirens wail and bombers tear through the sky, an SS convoy slips out of Kiel harbor. A partially completed U-boat is aboard, its hull still unpainted, its reactor not yet tested. Destination: a secret base on the coast of Norway, far from Allied bombers, where the project can continue in silence. What the Allies don't yet know is that these convoys carry more than machinery. Packed in lead-lined crates are containers of uranium oxide, smuggled from Norway's mines, escorted by the SS, and destined for the belly of a submarine that could change the course of history. And as these mysterious shipments vanish into the frozen fjords, Allied intelligence begins to take notice. Something is happening beneath the waves, something that could turn the tide of the war. The race has begun. Fade out as a distant sonar ping echoes through the dark Atlantic. They called it Operation Neptune's Ghost. Even within the labyrinthine halls of the Kriegsmarine, the name was whispered only behind closed doors. The project had evolved beyond mere innovation. It had become obsession. Hitler's generals no longer spoke of winning battles. They spoke of erasing the enemy's will to fight. And deep beneath the fog-covered docks of Bergen, Norway, one submarine, U-864, was being transformed into something the world had never seen before. The engineers working on the vessel could scarcely believe what they were building. The U-864 was no longer a weapon of conventional war. It was a prototype for a ghost, silent, self-powered, capable of traveling the entire length of the Atlantic without surfacing. Its reactor core was being tested in fragments, sealed behind reinforced bulkheads. Even the workers assembling it weren't told what it truly was. They were only ordered to follow instructions, delivered daily by officers in black SS uniforms. Every part of the construction site screamed secrecy. Floodlights illuminated the harbor night and day. Armed guards patrolled the catwalks, and the sound of hammering never stopped. Engineers were forbidden from writing notes or keeping blueprints. Orders came orally, and once completed, sections of the vessel were immediately welded shut. Dr. Erich Mettner, one of Heisenberg's former assistants, described in his journal what it was like to work on Projekt Neptun. He called it a fever dream. They were building a machine to contain the unimaginable, splitting atoms inside a steel coffin meant to move through crushing depths. Heisenberg himself, though skeptical, had been forced to consult on uranium refinement and reactor stability. His warnings about instability and radiation went ignored. "The Führer wants results," the SS officer had told him flatly. Not lectures. The men on site began to change. Prolonged exposure to the uranium shipments from Norway sickened several workers. Their hair thinned. Their skin turned grey. When one of them collapsed near the core assembly, coughing blood, his body was removed under the cover of darkness, and no one ever mentioned his name again. Still, the tests continued. Reports from the Bergen facility described the U-864's new propulsion system as promising but volatile. It relied on a compact experimental reactor designed to superheat seawater into steam, driving turbine engines without the need for air. Theoretically, the U-boat could remain submerged indefinitely. In practice, however, every test was a gamble. One miscalculation could vaporize the entire crew and the shipyard with it. By early 1945, the Allies were beginning to sense that something strange was happening along the Norwegian coast. Bletchley Park's codebreakers had been intercepting a series of cryptic Enigma messages tagged with a new operational prefix NG. Analysts speculated it referred to Neptune Group, perhaps a small fleet of advanced submarines. But the content of the messages was unlike anything they'd seen. Repeated references to cargo purity, containment, chambers, and radiation. Shielding puzzled even the top scientists. Advising British intelligence, Alan Turing's team began cross-referencing those terms with previously decrypted reports from Norway's heavy water plant in Vemork. The pieces didn't quite fit, but one conclusion began to emerge. Germany was moving uranium by sea. The question was, why? Meanwhile, in Germany, Dönitz grew increasingly desperate. He knew the Allied blockade had strangled his U-boat fleet, but he believed that one successful mission, one ghost vessel unleashed across the Atlantic, could restore terror to Allied hearts. Operation Neptune's Ghost would begin with a single submarine, U-864. Its mission was to deliver its reactor technology, along with several tons of refined uranium, to Japan, Germany's last Axis partner, still capable of continuing the atomic research project. The orders were clear. U-864 was to sail from Bergen under heavy escort, cross the North Sea, and rendezvous with Japanese forces near the Indian Ocean. If successful, it would give Japan access to the raw materials needed to develop its own atomic weapons. And if intercepted, the submarine was equipped with a self-destruct mechanism, designed to ensure no Allied forces could ever capture its technology. The men chosen for U-864's mission were hand-picked, veterans of the Atlantic campaigns, loyal to the Reich to the very end. They were told they were embarking on a voyage that would restore Germany's destiny. Few of them understood what was truly inside their cargo hold. Viewers still realized the mission was doomed before it began. Back in Bletchley Park, an American liaison named Captain Robert Hayes was reviewing the intercepted NG traffic when he noticed a peculiar repetition in one of the messages. Every fourth transmission contained an identical string of numbers. When decrypted, it revealed coordinates off the coast of Bergen. Hayes alerted London immediately, suspecting that the Germans were preparing to launch a high-value U-boat from that very port. But the British Admiralty was skeptical. Dozens of German subs were still scattered across the North Sea, and it was impossible to determine which one carried the supposed special cargo. Resources were stretched thin. The focus remained on protecting supply convoys rather than chasing shadows. And so, Operation Neptune's Ghost proceeded undisturbed. February 1945. Snow fell heavily over the Bergen shipyard as the final preparations were made. Inside U-864, engineers sealed the last access panel over the reactor chamber. The hum of the experimental core filled the vessel with a faint vibration that unsettled the crew. Some swore they could feel the heat of it through the steel bulkheads. Before departure, an SS officer boarded the submarine, carrying a small black case. He handed it to the captain, whispering instructions that only he was allowed to hear. Witnesses said the officer saluted stiffly and left without another word. Whatever was in that case, it was meant to be opened only if the mission failed. That night, as the submarine slipped beneath the icy waves, the harbor lights reflected off its black hull like a ghost vanishing into the sea. Above the surface, Germany was dying. But below, in the frozen silence of the Atlantic, a new kind of weapon had just been born. Back in Bletchley Park, the decoded coordinates reached Hayes's desk the next morning. He read them twice, then once more, his hands trembling. Something about those numbers didn't sit right. They weren't for a patrol route. They were launch coordinates. He looked up from the paper, pale, and whispered, "God help us. They're going to try it. Fade to black." The Arctic wind screamed across the North Sea in the winter of 1945, whipping icy spray over the decks of Allied destroyers. The Battle of the Atlantic was supposed to be nearing its end, the U-boat menace broken, its wolf pack scattered. But on February 6th, British sonar operators aboard HMS Venturer detected something impossible. The contact was faint, unusually deep, and moving in ways no submarine should have been able to move. It held a steady course toward open water, its depth fluctuating slightly, as though it were breathing. Operators listened in silence as the pings echoed back. The captain ordered another sweep. The same signature returned, steady, rhythmic, almost deliberate, a U-boat. But not like any they'd tracked before. Within hours, word reached London. The Admiralty, already on edge from Bletchley Park's decrypted transmissions, feared they had finally found Neptune's ghost. Orders went out across the fleet. Form a blockade around the Norwegian coast. Nothing leaves, nothing surfaces, but the Germans had planned for this. Deep below the surface, U-864 glided silently through the black water, its experimental propulsion system running at a low hum. The captain, Korvettenkapitän Ralph Reimar Wolfram, stood over a navigation table illuminated by a red lamp. His crew moved in whispers. The sound of the reactor was unsettling, a steady vibration that seemed to pulse through the ship like a heartbeat. They'd been running submerged for 10 days, deeper and longer than any U-boat in history. Wolfram's orders were simple: reach the North Atlantic, evade Allied patrols, and deliver the uranium cargo to a waiting Japanese submarine near the Indian Ocean. But each passing hour brought new problems. Condensation dripped from the ceiling, the air grew stale, and the temperature in the reactor compartment climbed beyond safety limits. Several men had already fallen ill, coughing violently, their skin pale and blistered. Radiation sickness, though no one dared say the word. Just a few more days, Wolfram told his first officer, his voice calm but hollow. Then Germany will have its miracle. Above them, the blockade tightened. Dozens of British and American ships spread across the North Sea, sweeping the depths with sonar. The coded name for the operation was Swordfish. It was led by Admiral Bertram Ramsay, the man who had once organized the evacuation at Dunkirk. Now he faced a mission just as desperate: to stop an invisible enemy carrying a weapon that could end everything. In Washington, the news reached the War Department. Reports described a super submarine capable of crossing the Atlantic undetected. Military analysts feared the unthinkable: a nuclear strike on American soil. If the rumors were true, the Nazis might have found a way to deliver an atomic device across the ocean, bypassing every defense. President Roosevelt was briefed personally. He ordered complete secrecy. The public could not know. If this ghost reaches our coast, he warned, we may not get another chance. Meanwhile, in the cold silence of the Atlantic, U-864 continued its deadly voyage. The crew grew restless. Some began to whisper that the mission was cursed, that they were not sailing toward victory, but into the depths of their own graves. The reactor's vibrations had become uneven, and a dull metallic ringing echoed through the hull every few hours. The engineers claimed it was thermal expansion, but the captain suspected otherwise. Something inside the propulsion chamber wasn't stable. Then came the first sonar ping. It was faint, distant, but unmistakable. An Allied submarine was tracking them. Wolfram ordered the engines to minimum output. Lights dimmed. Silence consumed the vessel. They sank deeper, 200, 300, 400 meters, farther than any U-boat had dared before. The hull creaked under the pressure. Above, HMS Venturer's sonar operator leaned forward, headphones pressed tight. She's moving slow, almost like she's hiding. The captain ordered depth charges prepared, but he hesitated. This wasn't a normal U-boat. The contact was steady, deliberate. He could sense intelligence in its movements, as though the vessel knew exactly where the hunters were. For hours, both submarines moved in silence, predator and prey, switching roles in the blackness of the sea. The crew aboard U-864 could hear faint echoes through the hull, like footsteps far above. Every man held his breath. Then, an accident. One of the German engineers, delirious from exhaustion, dropped a wrench in the reactor compartment. The metallic clang reverberated through the entire vessel. A moment later, the sonar operator on Venturer shouted, "Contact confirmed! Bearing 093! Depth charges fell into the sea. Explosions thundered above U-864, shaking the hull like an earthquake. Lights flickered, panels cracked, but the submarine held. Wolfram shouted for silent running again, guiding his vessel toward a deep trench along the seabed. If they could slip beneath the thermal layer, sonar would lose them. It worked, for now. The Allies' sonar screens went blank. The contact vanished. The Admiralty assumed the target had been destroyed. But on board U-864, the crew knew better. They were alive, barely, and still bound for open ocean. As night fell over the Norwegian coast, Admiral Ramsay refused to believe the mission was over. "No wreckage," he muttered. "No debris. She's still out there." He ordered Venturer to continue the hunt, even as winter storms closed in and fuel ran low. Deep below, Wolfram gathered his officers in the control room. The reactor's hum had changed pitch, growing erratic. "We complete our mission," he told them, though his face betrayed doubt. "No turning back." Outside, the water was pitch black, the world silent except for the faint thrum of the engine. In that silence, the men felt time slow, as if history itself were holding its breath. Somewhere above them, ships searched blindly. Somewhere ahead, the future of the war waited to be decided. And then, in the dark heart of the ocean, U-864's radio operator picked up a faint signal. It wasn't German. It wasn't Allied. It was something else, a code pattern they didn't recognize, pulsing slowly through the static, repeating every 30 seconds. Wolfram stared at the radio, his jaw tightening. "Who knows we're here?" he whispered. No one answered. Only the cold hum of the reactor responded, echoing like a heartbeat through the steel walls. Fade to black. The waters off Bergen were black and endless, a graveyard of sunken wrecks and forgotten missions. In February 1945, another shadow moved among them, U-864, damaged, exhausted, but still alive. Its captain, Ralph Reimar Wolfram, stood at the periscope, watching the dim shapes of the fjord fade behind them. Somewhere above, Allied destroyers combed the surface like wolves circling a wounded stag. Somewhere below, the deep trench opened like a mouth waiting to swallow them whole. The mission had failed. The reactor was unstable, half the crew was sick, and the uranium cargo leaked faint radiation that made the men dizzy and weak. Yet Wolfram refused to surface. To surrender would mean revealing Germany's final secret, and that, he knew, could never happen. Hundreds of meters away, beneath the same Black Sea, another submarine crept silently through the abyss. HMS Venturer, commanded by 25-year-old Lieutenant James Launders, had been hunting U-864 for days. He and his crew were exhausted, surviving on coffee and adrenaline, eyes fixed on the sonar screens glowing like ghostly orbs in the dark. The sonar operator whispered, "Contact. Faint, bearing 170. Launders leaned over his shoulder, eyes narrowing. There it was, the same slow, deliberate pattern they'd tracked before. "That's her," he said quietly. "Neptune's ghost." No one aboard Venturer understood what their quarry carried. They only knew that London had classified this target above all others. They were ordered not merely to intercept, but to destroy. For the next several hours, the two submarines danced through the depths. U-864 zigzagged across the fjord floor, trying to mask its movement behind thermal layers. Venturer mirrored, every maneuver matching its speed, its rhythm, its silence. Each vessel could hear the faint mechanical heartbeat of the other, two predators circling in the dark, each knowing one mistake meant death. Inside U-864, the tension was unbearable. The crew whispered prayers under their breath as the hull creaked like an old cathedral under the pressure. One engineer begged the captain to surface, to run for the coast, abandon ship if necessary. Wolfram refused. "Our mission does not end here," he said, clutching the black case given to him by the SS officer in Bergen. "We take the Reich's secret to the ocean floor before we surrender it." Aboard Venturer, Launders weighed his options. No submarine had ever fired on another while both were submerged. Torpedoes required prediction, not precision. He would have to anticipate where U-864 would be minutes into the future. He spread the plotted points across a grease pencil map, his voice low but steady. "We'll fire a 4-shot spread, different depths, different bearings. We'll calculate her evasive pattern manually." His crew exchanged glances. This was suicide, but Launder's tone left no room for hesitation. "Fire 1. The torpedo hissed into the abyss. Seconds passed like hours. U-864's hydrophone. Operator caught the faint vibration and screamed, "Torpedo in the water!" Wolfram reacted instantly, banking the submarine hard to port, diving deeper. The first torpedo streaked past the bow, vanishing into the dark. Fire 2. Another hiss, another explosion in the distance, closer this time. The hull shook, instruments shattered. Wolfram shouted orders as seawater burst through a cracked valve. The men scrambled to contain it, terrified but still alive. On Venturer, Launders stood motionless. He could hear the echo of his own heartbeat. "Fire 3! This time, U-864 tried a desperate maneuver, a reverse turn, engines screaming, diving toward the trench. The crew inside heard the torpedo's whine growing louder, closer, closer, then silence. It passed just above the stern, exploding harmlessly in open water. Launders exhaled, his face pale under the dim red lights. Fire 4. The final torpedo launched. It cut through the water like a blade, silent and invisible. For nearly a minute both submarines moved in perfect synchrony, one running, one chasing, their courses destined to cross. Inside U-864, the navigator whispered, "Depth 500 meters. She's still behind us." Wolfram gripped the console. "Hold course." He opened the black case. Inside lay a small sealed vial, a final failsafe. If captured, he was to break it, releasing a chemical agent that would destroy the reactor core. His thumb hovered over the glass. Then came the sound, a sharp metallic ping. The crew froze. The torpedo had found them. Impact. The explosion tore through U-864's midsection with a roar that shook the sea. Lights burst, steel twisted, and a wave of heat and pressure ripped through the compartments. Men screamed as the vessel broke apart. The reactor chamber imploded, crushing itself under the weight of the Atlantic. In a flash of white light and soundless fury, the ghost of Neptune vanished into the deep. Aboard Venturer, the sonar operator listened as the contact disintegrated into static. Then nothing. Launders stared at the blank screen. He'd done it, history's first underwater kill. But instead of triumph, a heavy silence filled the control room. They had no idea what they had just destroyed, or how close they'd come to unleashing something far worse. Later, as Venturer surfaced to send confirmation, Launders looked out over the dark waves. "It's over," his first officer said softly. Launders shook his head. "No, not over. Just buried." Miles below, U-864 lay broken in the Bergen Trench. Inside its shattered hull, the uranium containers glowed faintly in the dark, their deadly cargo scattered like the bones of a fallen god. Above, the sea was calm once more. The war continued, unaware that for a few terrible hours, the fate of the world had hung by a thread thinner than the steel that had just been torn apart. In the years after the war, when Europe began to rebuild from its ashes, whispers still drifted among naval circles, stories of a submarine that had vanished with something impossible aboard. The Allies called it simply the Bergen Ghost. Most dismissed it as rumour, but in 1949, Norwegian fishermen began reporting strange metallic debris washing up along the coast near Fedje Island. Long, corroded pieces of steel, unlike any known wreck. That was when the Royal Navy returned to the site where HMS Venturer had made her legendary kill. Diving technology was primitive in those days, but curiosity outweighed caution. The first descent revealed a haunting scene, the twisted remains of a U-boat lying fractured along the seabed, its hull cracked open like an egg. The identification, number barely visible under the corrosion, read U-864. Around it, dozens of small metal cylinders were scattered, sealed containers, each still gleaming faintly through decades of rust. When a diver pried one open, a cloud of strange black dust drifted upward. The Geiger counter in his hand began to scream. What they had found wasn't cargo. It was uranium oxide, hundreds of kilograms of it. Enough, as one stunned scientist remarked, to make several very dangerous experiments or one unthinkable weapon. For years, the discovery was buried under official secrecy. Reports were classified, files locked away in London and Washington, but behind closed doors, Allied scientists pieced together the fragments, drawings of a miniature reactor core, journals recovered from the wreck describing Projekt Neptun, and coded orders from the Kriegsmarine High Command. The evidence was undeniable. Germany had not only been dreaming of a nuclear submarine, it had been building one. In Washington, the revelation sent ripples through the post-war scientific community. Among the recovered materials were engineering, sketches for a liquid metal cooling loop, a radical idea decades ahead of its time. American naval engineers at the newly formed Atomic Energy Commission studied the German papers with fascination. Though incomplete and flawed, the designs hinted at a terrifying ingenuity, a mind willing to turn the ocean itself into a launch pad for annihilation. By the early 1950s, deep beneath the Naval Reactors Branch in Idaho, a group of American engineers began experimenting with a prototype reactor using principles eerily similar to the German concept. They called their vision Nautilus, a submarine that could remain underwater indefinitely, powered not by diesel or batteries, but by the steady, humming heart of a nuclear core. The irony was chilling. From the wreckage of Hitler's last gamble, the United States had drawn the blueprint for the next age of naval warfare. When USS Nautilus finally launched in 1954, it made history as the world's first operational nuclear-powered submarine. Its silent propulsion, limitless range, and unmatched stealth fulfilled the very dream Germany had chased in desperation a decade earlier. Yet few outside the highest levels of government ever learned that the seed of that technology had been buried under a Norwegian trench alongside the men who had died trying to build it. Even decades later, when declassified documents emerged in the 1970s, the truth felt surreal. Historians realized just how close the world had come to witnessing an entirely new kind of war, one fought not in the skies above Hiroshima or the deserts of Nevada, but beneath the cold, black waves of the Atlantic. At the site of U-864's grave, the ocean floor remains toxic to this day. The corroded uranium containers still leak faint traces of radiation into the sediment, a silent reminder of what might have been. Norway declared the area off-limits, sealing the seabed beneath layers of sand and concrete. They called it a containment zone, but to the few who know its story, it is something else entirely. A warning, because the wreck still lies there, untouched. And deep in the silence, beyond the reach of light, the ghosts of Projekt Neptun still wait, rusting, dreaming, whispering of a world that almost drowned in its own ambition. What if the U-864 had surfaced? What if its mission, born from desperation and genius, had succeeded? What if a single German submarine, carrying a crude atomic device, had reached the U.S. coastline in the spring of 1945? The world might have entered the nuclear age not with the blinding light over Hiroshima, but with a silent explosion beneath the waves of the Atlantic. A mushroom cloud rising from the ocean, staining the horizon with fire. For a fleeting moment in time, that future was terrifyingly possible. Hitler's Germany stood on the edge of collapse, yet even in ruin, it dreamed of ultimate destruction, a weapon that could erase nations in a single breath. If Projekt Neptun had been realized, there would have been no warning, no defense, no second chance. The ocean itself would have become the launch platform of the apocalypse, but fate intervened. Through courage, chance, and the quiet brilliance of those who broke codes and hunted shadows, the unthinkable never came to pass. The Battle of Bergen Trench ended the project before it began, sinking not just a submarine, but a vision of horror that the world was not yet ready to face. And yet, the echoes remain. The wreck of U-864 still rests on the seafloor, its hull fractured, its deadly cargo sealed within like a tomb. Every year, currents brush against the corroded metal, whispering through its cracks. Divers who descend there speak of an eerie quiet, a pressure that feels almost alive. It's as if the ocean itself remembers, when we look back at that moment, the near birth of a nuclear submarine in the last days of Hitler's Reich. We are reminded of how thin the line truly is between victory and oblivion. A few more months, a few more experiments, a few more shipments of uranium. That's all it would have taken to change the course of human history forever. The U-864 sleeps beneath the waves, trapped in the cold dark of the Norwegian trench, a monument not to power, but to restraint, to the fragile mercy of timing. And as the world sails forward on nuclear-powered ships born from its legacy, that submarine remains a silent warning from the deep, that even in defeat, human ambition can reach for the end of the world. Fade out, the screen darkens. Only the sound of distant sonar pings echoes through the blackness, like the heartbeat of a secret the ocean refuses to forget.